The last couple webinars that we did were through the growing process, and through the grow takes us to the harvest, and then the curing process. And this is really sort of the um, uh, I would say the finish strong is what you want to think here. You've put in a lot of work to grow the crop, and there's a lot of important aspects to growing a good, healthy plant that is then producing ideally a large volume of product, and then you need to have that product actually finish out well. Um, the the harvest and then into the curing, that's really where you get the separation from okay product to very nice. Really, that fire stuff that you want is people that know how to go through the curing process, and um, don't cut any corners for that. Be patient with it, and the curing process should be a slower. You want to try to draw out the drying process. I know if you look for uh, recommendations online or kind of out in um, uh, general information area, you'll get a whole slew of ideas about how to dry and cure it. I was reading something the other day in an article um, that was saying drying should take between 2 and 7 days, and that's just not true. Um, Not doing it in a way that you're going to end with a premium product. You want to draw that out. It should be, 7 would be a minimum. You want to be more like 10 days to 2 weeks in the drying process. And so when we harvest the plant, we go through the light deprivation at the very end, and we have the plant at the point that we want to harvest. We then go in and you want to trim the entire plant, as in cut it at its base, to then be able to hang that plant from your drying lines, and hang that whole plant. And the reason that we want to do the whole plant is there is a lot of moisture that is stored up in that plant, and you want to allow that extra moisture in the plant versus cutting each of the main branches, which would then have less overall moisture, and would allow the drying process to happen faster. We don't want that. We want it to be a slower drying process. As you dry, what you're doing is you're uh, causing the plant to use up the last bit of nutrient and moisture in the plant, and send it where it's supposed to go, which ultimately is the bud. This is simulating the plant dying and the last bit of squeezing all that goodness out, as well as in that process you have aerobic bacteria that is breaking down the sugars, and the cannabinoids, the terpenes that you're trying to preserve. You want to maintain and sort of halt that process of decay, and you do that by drying it and bringing it into an environment and a temperature and humidity that is inhospitable to those aerobic bacteria, which they grow, and mold, mildew, and those aerobic bacteria, they grow best at about 77 to 80, 83 degrees, um, and a higher humidity. So the temperature and humidity that we're going to have in our drying room, if you're doing a tent setup, you may be doing it directly in the tent that you were growing in, but maintaining that drying room at 60% humidity at 60 degrees. That is sort of the sweet spot. Uh, there's plenty of stuff that will say there's a range between 55 and 65% humidity and similar temperature, but you want to hit that 60 and 60. And then if there is any fluctuation in your environment, knowing that the world is not perfect, you're staying within that safe zone where you don't want to be drying the product out too fast. And you don't want it to be allowed to grow mold, mildew, and allow bacteria to continue in the decay. And so that is the ideal scenario for that. One way that you can maintain and sort of a tool that you want to make sure that you have in your drying room is a hygrometer. And these basic tool, it will tell you the humidity and the temperature. And let's see here. Let me share that with you. Nope. Let me share that with you on my screen. Where did we go? Here we go. Okay, so this is the humidity and temperature gauge, and you can I just went to a basic website for a whole list of different ones, and they range in the generally the $10 to $20 range, and you want it to be relatively efficient, so a good quality one, but you just want to have that in there, just like a tool like a thermometer in your grow tent. These are great for both temperature and humidity, and so you can maintain that and make sure that you're maintaining that. You will want to have a dehumidifier and an AC unit. And if you are in a dry environment, say you're in New Mexico or something like that, where you might be fighting it dropping too low in humidity, you would want a humidifier to maintain the right temperature and humidity for that. And so when you kick on an AC unit to cool it down, it's going to pull moisture out. And so you'll need to counteract that with a humidifier. If you are growing in a very humid climate, then that ambient temperature or ambient humidity is going to be fighting you, and you want that dehumidifier to be able to maintain that. And so in previous videos, we've gone over different simple devices that you can have in a small room like that to be able to manage that. Okay. And then, so that is a drying room is going to basically have your drying lines, string, wire, whatever you want, going across to be able to hang them from the ceiling, the full plant, top to bottom. And you can pack them together, or I should say, you can hang them together relatively close, as long as you have a good air circulation. So the next tool that you want in that tent or in that room is circulation fans. And you want to make sure that you have a good air circulation so that all the plant dries evenly. And that humidity keeps moving around, because moisture will continue to come out of the plant. And if there's no air movement, that humidity is going to sit right in with the buds. And that's how you can develop mold and mildew, ruining your crop. And you don't want to mess around with that. So good airflow in that environment as well. Now that's going to cut down humidity. Airflow is going to naturally cause it to dry a little bit faster. So you want to be that's one of those things that you need to monitor and be checking on a daily, and multiple times a day would be ideal. But you want to make sure that you're hitting that each and every day. And so 1 to 2 week time period is really where you're going to want to see that drying. before you do the final trim. When you're hanging them, you can trim off, say, all the fan leaves and some of the other leaves close into the bud itself. But if you're in a drier environment, you may want to leave some of those leaves on for the hanging process in order to allow a little bit more moisture coming in from that plant or around that plant to help maintain that humidity. If you're in a high humidity environment, you want to clean that plant off as much as you can before you do the drying. Because it's the too much humidity that you'll be fighting against. If that's making sense for you right now, if you can type humidity in the chat just to make sure that you got all that information. And if you have any questions, now is a good time to ask about that initial drying period. And I guess that's the bulk of the hanging process that you want to be ready for. Once you get once it's dried, then you're going to trim the buds, and then you'll want to store that in a brown paper bag. Okay. And then so if you trim after a week, or I'm sorry, if you hang it for a week and then you trim them off and put it in the brown paper bag and keep it in that same drying room, 60% humidity, 60% or 60 degrees, allow it to dry like that. What that does is it keeps that moisture, but then at the same time, it allows the bag is very breathable, and so it slows the process down a little bit, but it still allows the air to permeate back and forth and maintain those humid conditions. Okay. Once you go from there, after you've done the brown paper bag, and we're talking basic brown paper bags, nothing rocket scientist about it. Then you can take those and store them in a mason jar, and I'm talking. I'll just share the screen. I pulled it up for fun, but we're talking mason jars. Okay. And when you go to dispensaries, a lot of times they have them in there. One is because glass is really good for not allowing oxygen in and out. Once you've reached that ideal curing stage, or I should say drying stage, to allow it to cure in that environment. And then every day you want to burp it and allow excess moisture out, and the pressure buildup to release, and then you reseal it. And you want to be doing that burping process in your drying room that is 60% humidity, 60% or 60 degrees, 60% humidity, and then you'll want to check the buds. You can have a hygrometer if you want, but if you're in that dry room, you know that environment is the ideal state. If it is getting a little bit moist on the inside, a little bit damp, you can start to tell the moisture will come out from the inside of the bud to the outside, and you'll see the difference, something drying versus something becoming more damp. You can leave that jar open for a little bit and let it breathe a little bit longer than just a burp, and allow it to re-normalize to that 60 and 60 before you reseal it again to prevent anything from having bud rot. And if you have dried it too much, you can allow it to be in that 60% humidity environment. If it looks like it has dried out, you can allow it to then renormalize to that 60% humidity. And so let me go back. So that is the process, and once you get those buds into the jars and you are on a regular burping schedule every day, you burp the jars. You really, at that point, you're looking to take that to the distributor, or perhaps the distributor picks it up a little bit earlier in the process. That's kind of the conversation that you have with your the different places. They may store it in a jar. They might have their own packaging and that type of thing that they do for their own displays. And that can vary how that process works. You can also keep the the product in the jars for a very extended period of time without any real degradation to the quality in those mason jars. If you put it in something like a plastic tote or something like that, it does stand the risk of taking on the plastic taste of like a plastic bag or something like that. There are some really high quality totes that are somewhat expensive, but a little bit larger quantities if you get to something like that. But the smaller or the mason jars and the quantities that you're able to do with that are still quite large if you run that part effectively. And so that is kind of the ideal scenario for you, and moving that product quickly from that point. But you're going to want to have that in a secure location, because at that point that is the finished product. Okay, and that's the desirable item. That is where your value is. So then from that point you're good to go. That brings you from the very beginning of sprouting of the seed, growing through the veg and the flower phases, the last light deprivation, the drying, the trimming, the curing, and bringing to the final sale of the product. So hopefully that was helpful for the last process. Some good bullet points to make sure that you're doing it right. The key numbers here is 60 and 60. The 60 degrees and 60% humidity is the environment that you're maintaining. 1 to 2 weeks. 1 week drying, hanging, and then another week in a brown paper bag. Then transferring to that glass mason jar. Glass does not allow the oxygen to permeate, whereas some plastic and non-sealed containers may do that. That's the key part of it. Keep those sugars from and cannabinoids and terpenes from degrading any further, and that is that's what you want to focus on. If your numbers start to skew, you want to adjust them back to that happy place for making your happy buds. So thank you very much, and we will see you next week as well. And we'll start getting into stuff more specific with hydroponics and different hydroponic systems, some key points that might be different from the soil grow system that we just walked through in the growing process. All right. Have a great